I understand that since Ariel's statement was released yesterday, there's been quite a few requests for me to comment, and I appreciate that. Just like to say at the outset, it's unbelievable or incomprehensible what people are going through, all of the families, including Ariel and her mum, what they've confronted, and I have like to again extend my condolences and sympathies to everyone that's been impacted by this terrible tragedy.
Where does the blame lie mostly, you think, Minister, for the failures of the family?
So what I've got to say is, as I said on Monday, as I understand it, the police were approached by Ariel and her mother, and what they reported did not meet the threshold for application of a police order. I've said, and as a consequence of that, as I said on Monday, the Premier's asked the Police Commissioner and myself to look at that. My personal view is there's a need to lower that threshold and move into the space of where there's an acrimonious breakup and there's known to be guns involved, move very quickly to remove those guns. We need to change the law, because the current law is what dictates the process. That's what dictated what happened here, and it's inadequate. I've acknowledged that. That's why we've got new laws. But in this particular case, with respect to removal of firearms in an acrimonious breakup, I think we need to move earlier. I've asked the police to provide us with a submission to potentially move amendments to the current law that's going through the Parliament. So whilst it's in the Parliament, we can amend it to specifically target that challenge. It will upset some people because we'll be moving very early at the very first contact potentially by someone in an acrimonious breakup where there are firearms involved. Police will be moving to seize them, and that will remove any discretion or concern around subjectivity around the process from police.
Saying to his backup, bring your bulletproof vest. How does it not? I mean, people would say, how does it not meet?
Jeff, as the Police Commissioner indicated, some of the things that were in the statement by Ariel we hadn't heard before. He's directed an investigation into that whole matter, and that's the right thing to do. You requested that we talk about guns in light of an horrific gun murder only on Friday. The laws are being debated. They had been in the Parliament for months. They've passed through the lower house. They had been debated in the lower house. They'd moved to the upper house. They'd been debated for more than a week in the upper house by the time this incident occurred and by the time your newsrooms requested that I comment. It's a reasonable thing that we reflected on what was being done. It would have been impossible for me not to have stated in what ways the murderer would have been impacted by our new laws. I didn't say that they would have prevented him having the ability to carry out the act, but what I did say is there are at least 4 different ways the laws would have impacted him. So he wouldn't have had the ability to have a collector's licence for the Glock that he used. He wouldn't have had those under the new laws. He would have had fewer firearms. That's a fact. Doesn't mean that he wouldn't have had a firearm, but under the new laws, we would be the only state in the country that imposes a limit of firearm numbers. He would have been impacted by the principle, which we are the only state, I believe, to have in our law, which reflects the National Firearms Agreement statement, an observation that ownership and use of a firearm in Australia is a privilege subject to the primacy of community safety. Now, that's in our laws. Nowhere else is it in our laws. There's other things that we're doing. So this is, and I know it's not directly relevant to this case because until he conducted this act, as far as I know, there was no indication that he was an FDV offender or anything of that nature. But we, as part of the laws that are going through the upper house, are creating a disqualification order. There are 1,000 serious offenders, so people who have been found guilty of serious offences for which the maximum penalty is 5 years or more. There are 1,000 of those people who currently have a licence, a firearms licence, under the current laws, because the State Administration Tribunal, the Supreme Court of Western Australia, enables them to retain their firearms even if the Commissioner deems them not fit and proper. We are changing the law to create a disqualification order. When that law becomes effective, we will remove 1,000 firearms licences from people who currently have them. We'll take all their guns off them. That is part of what we're doing. It wouldn't have impacted him, obviously, on Thursday because he hadn't at that point done anything that would enable us to apply that law. But it would impact 1,000 people, potentially, as I understand it, around 100 of those 1,000 are FDV offenders. So they have committed serious FDV offences, but they still have their guns under the current law. It's important. The gun laws that are passing through Parliament right now will make the community safer. They won't necessarily stop every incident. They won't necessarily have stopped that incident, but we weren't writing this law for Friday. This law began to be written 2 years ago. If you consider what has happened in just the last 7 years since we've been in government, licensed firearm owners, there have been, on average, 4 people a year are shot dead, murdered with a gun in Western Australia over the last 7 years. A number of those murders are committed by licensed firearms owners. The Osmington mass murder, the biggest mass shooting in Australia since the Port Arthur massacre, happened in Western Australia, was committed by a licensed firearms owner with a licensed firearm. Nick Martin's assassination in a public place at the Motorplex, surrounded by other innocent people, was committed by a licensed firearm owner with a licensed firearm. Last year, the first school shooting in Australia was committed by a child with a licensed firearm, the child of a licensed firearm owner, and last year the Kellerberrin murder-suicide was committed by a licensed firearm owner with a licensed firearm. And then this year, we've had this horrific event, a licensed firearms owner with a licensed firearm. Firearms aren't the only thing that needs to be considered in FDV response, but it's a part of it. It's one of the elements. It's not in the upper house because of what happened on Friday. It's in the upper house because we've been working on it for 2 years, and that needs to be considered.